Okay, so first step first, we have to take this little plastic cover off. So unlike most cars, it's not just a plastic cover, it's attached to things. It's attached to these two hoses. So in the back here, we're gonna unscrew this clamp and pull this hose off. I'm gonna leave this hose on. I'm gonna unplug this connector, and then you unlatch this, you unlatch this. This pulls out. This is free from the air cleaner. We're gonna get rid of this connector and we're gonna unbolt that, and the whole thing should come off. There's two 10mm bolts that hold it on. We've got that back hose off. This hose is all connected. We've undone these two bolts up front, and this whole thing should just pull away. Before we start anything in this car, we come to the trunk, we lift the carpet, we pop this cover off. You can see the negative terminal of the battery. It's a 10mm socket. Lights on. Loosen this up. Disconnect. Make sure it's safely to the side. Lights are off. This car has a bunch of sensors, and whenever we do any work in the car, disconnect that, otherwise you might trigger a code that might require a trip to the dealer to reset. Okay, so we've got a coolant leak here. I don't know if you can see down in there, but it's wet. That down there is wet. So the coolant leak is coming from this water outlet kind of thing, where you got a couple hoses attaching to this. This right here attaches to the block. You can see the block and this water outlet thing, and there's a gasket in between. I just picked it up from the Chevy dealer. So what we're gonna do is replace that gasket. So we got a couple hoses to take off, and it looks like right there, E10 reverse Torx bolts. So, and then we've got this little electrical plug right here. So we'll start with taking that off, get it out of the way, and then what we'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll take this clamp off, I'll take this hose off, and we'll take these big hoses off. To do this job, you are going to need to vacuum fill the system at the end. So I think a vacuum filling system at Harbor Freight to fill coolant, I think it's like $40 or something. So that's a prerequisite for this. If you don't have that, don't start this. If you're not willing to buy that, don't start this, because you drain the coolant out of the system, you're not going to be able to get the air bubbles out. There's no way to bleed the system other than the vacuum. I've decided to leave the hoses alone because I figured all I need to do is just take this thing off and replace the gasket behind it. So this Torx came off, it's loose now. It came off really easy with the regular wrench and my socket. But this one, it's really hard to get to because of this hump over here. This gets in the way of this bolt. So you can't get a regular socket on there, a regular wrench on there. So this is what I'm doing. I put the socket on a small extension and I put it on this vice grip. And I'm gonna try to get in there and see if that fits. Okay, I got it. I just ended up having to use an 8mm wrench. I am not an advocate for using the wrong tools. In this case, though, it worked. So an 8mm wrench fits these Torx E10. Just use the box end part of it. It didn't seem plausible that this whole thing would be held on by two bolts. So there's actually a third one right underneath that hose. There's the third bolt, and that should be it to get it all off. At this point, all the bolts are off. This is the gasket that we have to replace. You can see it's molded to fit a certain way. It doesn't matter like if you fit it this way or that way, but it'll only fit with these indents. It'll only fit one way. So I'm gonna go ahead and see if this will pull back. And it's not pulling back. So there may be a fifth bolt somewhere. Let me just take a quick look. I mean a fourth bolt. Fortunately, I missed a fourth bolt as well, so now you guys know. There's a bolt right underneath this right here. There's a bolt. So let me take that off and I'll pull this whole block off. All right, as you can see, got quite the mess going on. A bunch of coolant coming out. but we can just pull this back and we can see that our gasket is pretty knackered in there. I don't know if you can see in there. Let me get a better view. That's our gasket right there. And it's split in half. And it's all messed up. Sorry for the shaky cam. It's just really hard to do with one hand. That's our gasket. And it's split. No bueno. And as you can see, our mating surface here looks pretty nasty as well. So I'm gonna just go ahead and clean this up. Carb cleaner and some rags, and I'll put in the new gasket. So I've got the mating surface cleaned up as good as I could get it, at least down where the gasket will attach. And I'll pop the gasket on here. To it. The gasket only fits one way in that indent in the back. And so now I'll put this back on and put the screws back on. Follow the instructions that come with your vacuum kit, but you hook it up to your air, you run a vacuum, so this drops down, you let it hold it. I'm not really getting a good feel, so I'm not getting much of a vacuum, but I did earlier. I got a vacuum earlier, and the level in this tank dropped a lot. I don't think we need to vacuum the whole system. Actually, usually how this works is you empty out the entire system, you pull a vacuum, there's only a vacuum in the system, there's no air in the system, then you put the coolant in. But because we didn't drain the whole radiator, we've only drained up to like the level of the top of the engine. I think if we slowly pour the coolant in, it should be fine. Okay, we've got everything put back together. So the last thing is to put the cover back on. Put the cover back on. The one thing we need to make sure that goes on is this hose in the back. It's attached, and then in the front we have to make sure that our oil cap goes through. And then over here on the side, we have to make sure that this connector is plugged in. And then how this goes is you put the back end in first. Make sure these clips are out of the way. Okay, and then they fit right in. That's all tight. This connector is good, and now the only thing remaining is to screw that down and to tighten these bolts back up, and that's it. We're good to go. The last thing we need to do is to reconnect the battery, and then your car should start and everything should be good.